In 1980, the historical Medellin Cartel leader Pablo Escobar had an idea. Basically, he had a vision, something of a dream, and that was to turn Colombia into a narco-state, a country where the government and all public institutions would be directly controlled by drug trafficking. Such was his commitment that in 1982, as I think you'll probably know, Pablo Escobar himself, one of the most important mobsters in all of history, gained a seat at the Colombian Chamber of Representatives. And it's important to bear in mind that it's one thing for the mafia to buy or bribe a politician, and quite another for them to hold all the power directly. Can you imagine a country where the police, the army, all administrative officials, and even the courts themselves were ultimately under the direct orders of drug dealers? Of course, if Pablo Escobar's vision had panned out, Colombia wouldn't only have much higher levels of drug production and export, but the Medellin Cartel itself would become untouchable, invincible. He would have gained complete impunity to do and undo whatever he wanted at will. Fortunately, Pablo Escobar never managed to carry out his dream. However, today, 3 decades later, it looks like his dream is now being realized, but this time we're not talking about Colombia, we're talking about Venezuela.
Hay que decirlo con voz alta. Colombia produce la cocaína de este mundo y eso debe acabarse. Nosotros si los capturamos aquí, hemos capturado más de 100 capos de la droga colombiana aquí en Venezuela. Somos víctima y así nos declaramos.
Apparently, the 4 characters you're looking at right now don't only control the country, they are also the leaders of an international crime and drug trafficking network. Of course, we're talking about Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, Diosdado Cabello, the powerful president of the National Constituent Assembly, who may already rank as the strongest man in the regime, and Tarek al-Assami, former vice president and current minister of industry and national production, whose personal fortune, according to DEA calculations, surpasses the $3 billion mark. And the 4th is Nestor Reverol, Minister of Internal Affairs, Justice and Peace, who, to top it off, was the previous National Counter-Narcotics Office Director. Well, everything indicates that these 4 people are leading the transformation of Venezuela into a narco-state. Listen up.
The mafia takes control.
Venezuela is in shreds. Hunger is increasing, inflation is out of control, and hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing the country. Even hospitals don't have basic supplies like medicine, analytical equipment, or plasters. There's such a huge mess that the PDVSA itself, the Venezuelan state-owned oil company with the most reserves in the world, is bankrupt. Consider this. To this day, PDVSA has so many embargo orders that in order to sell the increasingly dwindling Venezuelan oil, it's beginning to resort to tricks and techniques used by Hollywood movie-style smugglers. For example, since Venezuelan oil companies are at risk of being confiscated to settle all outstanding debts on the oil they transport, PDVSA has begun to transfer oil from its ships to other ships with the Cuban flag out at sea. These ships are then responsible for taking the crude oil to its destination, thus avoiding being seized. Because, folks, in Venezuela, practically everything that has value has been or is being looted. Corruption has reached almost every corner of the country. So the Bolivarian revolution promised prosperity. What they forgot to clarify is that all that prosperity would only be for a few, for the friends of the revolution, of course. Don't believe me? Well, take a look at this. Many regime members promote and lead operations for gas contraband to sell in Brazil and Colombia. They are also mostly responsible for food and medicine contraband, which the state buys and then sells on the black market. They have looted public accounts, and tens of billions of dollars have disappeared from the government and from the PDVSA. In Venezuela, even the central bank's US dollars have been looted. Yep, you really did hear that right. Allow me to explain this. One of the first things that the Chavez regime did was implement a rigid exchange control. They fixed, for example, the official exchange between the bolivar and the US dollar to a rate that had nothing to do with the numbers on the street. That way, the government's friends could access US dollars with just a handful of bolivars. Bolivars that, due to the country's current hyperinflation, are now worth practically nothing. The maneuver was so well perfected that it is estimated that 20% of all imports declared in recent years have been completely false operations that were done for the sole purpose of obtaining dollars at the official exchange rate and then to save them in foreign accounts. And this is important because according to estimates, we could be talking about a theft of more than $100 billion. And of course, PDVSA hasn't escaped this plunder.
A group of companies lent 7.2 billion bolivares to PDVSA, which, when exchanged at the black market rate, would be about $42 million, but when exchanged at the official rate, would become approximately $600 million, which were deposited in an account in Malta. Cesar Batiz, Venezuelan journalist.
But of course, since no more can be squeezed out of the country, the regime giants have sought a new alternative source of income.
Expropiese. De acuerdo. Y aquel edificio allá en la esquina, ahora véndamelo al gobierno, al Estado. Entonces ahora los dueños dicen, no queremos vender. Ahora yo digo, no, yo se los compro. ¿Cuánto vale? Que se lo pagamos. Y vamos a recuperar el Banco de Venezuela para ponerlo al servicio de los venezolanos. No está en venta, pero usted sabe que yo lo puedo expropiar perfectamente, ¿verdad? Lo puedo expropiar.
Los modelos productivos que hasta ahora hemos ensayado han fracasado. Y la responsabilidad es nuestra, es mía, es tuya.
¿Son o no son trogloditas? Lo están ratificando aquí. Ellos mismos lo están ratificando.
Turning into a narco-state.
The issue of drug dealers in Venezuela isn't new. It has, however, evolved. Allow me to explain. For years, Colombian cartels tried to use routes through Venezuela to distribute their products. And of course, to do so, they began bribing policemen, National Guard members, high officials, etc. These people would then turn a blind eye. This was the first stage. As it worked, dealers got to know the land better and figured out who they could trust and who they couldn't. So they moved into the second stage of things, which was something like, alright, now that we have a deal, I'll give you some more money, but you don't only look away, you've also got to protect me and transport my merchandise. And this second stage was implemented. Later, many Colombian mobsters realized that given the enormous pressure they had from the Colombian government and the DEA, they'd be safer in Venezuela. So at the beginning of the 21st century, that's precisely what happened. Many of these sinister merchants moved their operations centers from Colombia to Venezuela. And that's when they started to closely collaborate with the authorities there. And I mean really closely. So what do you think the Venezuelan government did then? Well, in 2005, they decided to expel the DEA from Venezuelan territory and suspend their agreement to monitor narco flights. Therefore, Venezuelan territory became a kind of refuge for drug traffickers. The United States could no longer keep track of them there. Pretty fantastic for them, isn't it? Of course, in exchange for getting rid of the United States, they had to pay a modest commission. The regime giants, they needed to live off something, right? Well, that was the third stage. But hold on a moment here, because that's how we got to the fourth and last stage, which is where we're at right now. Business was going well. So well, in fact, that many of the Bolivarian revolutionary leaders asked themselves a question. We have the government, the police, the army, and a lot of resources. Why on earth should we share anything with the Colombians, or whoever else?
Nosotros sí los capturamos aquí, hemos capturado más de 100 capos de la droga colombiana. Aquí en Venezuela.
So, do you know what happened then? Well, the Venezuelan authorities began arresting all of the drug traffickers who didn't want to cooperate with them by giving their routes as well as their distribution business to them. That's how people such as Maximiliano Bonilla, aka Valenciano, the chief of the Envigado office, Hector Herman Buitrago, aka Martin Llanos, Diego Perez Henao, aka Diego Restrojo, and Daniel Barrera, aka El Loco, fell. All of them were found in the list of most significant traffickers. So everything indicates that right now in Venezuela, even though there are tons of criminal groups operating in the area, the government giants hold the ultimate control. In control are characters like Diosdado Cabello, allegedly the most important leader of the Los Soles cartel, the cartel formed by the leaders of the Bolivarian government.
The Venezuelan people suffer under corrupt politicians who tighten their grip over power while lining their own pockets. We are imposing costs on figures like Diosdado Cabello, who exploit their official positions to engage in narcotics trafficking, money laundering, embezzlement of state funds, and other corrupt activities. U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin.
In fact, one of Cabello's own personal assistants, Lismi Salazar, fled Venezuela in 2014 with the help of the DEA, and his statement couldn't be more forceful. In addition to providing evidence on the organization's operation, he stated that Mr. Cabello, president of the National Constituent Assembly, gives direct orders on the routes and the departure of boats loaded with prohibited substances. And he's not the only one. Testimonies are accumulating in the offices of the DEA. For example, there's Walid Makled's statement from when he was arrested in Colombia in 2011. Maduro was one of the most powerful drug traffickers in Venezuela. For example, he controlled Puerto Cabello, which according to the DEA was the exit point for most of the narcotics distributed from the country. Well, after his arrest, Maduro declared with great detail that he had done business with several dozens of Venezuelan generals, high-level government officials such as Henry Rangel Silva, who was later named Minister of Defense, or Hugo Carvajal, former Army Intelligence Director, who supposedly paid him $50,000 a week, which is certainly a nice salary. He also claimed to have financed one of Hugo Chavez's campaigns in exchange for concessions in Puerto Cabello. With all these relationships, it's easy to understand how, in November 2016, Efrain Antonio Campo Flores and Francisco Flores de Freitas, two of the Venezuelan First Lady's nephews, were convicted in a New York court for conspiring to traffic hundreds of kilos of narcotics. And folks, according to current estimates, the business in Venezuela, it won't stop growing. Between 15 and 20% of all the cocaine that moves in the world every year passes through this country. And not only that, apparently the number of laboratories is also rising a great deal. Of course, the giants of the Bolivarian Revolution need money to keep the structures of repression loyal: the army, the police, the National Guard. Also, in exchange for working in Venezuela, the different criminal groups based there, from the mafia to the paramilitaries and the Colombian guerrillas, support the regime. And since there's good business, Maduro and company are still filling their pockets. Unfortunately, the consequences of all of this are terrible. For one, looting all public resources has led the country to ruin, and on top of that, it's fueling an enormous amount of violence. See, according to data from the Venezuelan Violence Observatory, in 2017 there were 89 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants in the country. That is more than 26,000 people who lost their lives violently. Venezuela has become the most dangerous country in all of Latin America, and the situation in some areas like Caracas is even worse. The country's homicide rate skyrocketed in 2017 to 130 people per 100,000 inhabitants. Meanwhile, members of the government are taking advantage of the situation and developing fortunes, which they're using to buy properties all over the world, from the Dominican Republic to Madrid. Indeed, Madrid is a city to which not only thousands of Venezuelans fleeing the disaster are arriving, but also many of the relatives of the Soles cartel bosses and other high-position members loyal to the revolution are going to.
I now sometimes find myself sitting in restaurants in Madrid right next to people whom I wouldn't feel comfortable ever seeing in Caracas. Leopoldo López Gil, father of Leopoldo López, a leading opposition politician who has been kept under house arrest in Caracas.
Unfortunately, the Bolivarian regime has found its best ally in drug dealing, both to fill their pockets and to keep their power. In short, dear viewer, for now, this is just how things are. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. Also, of course, this channel is possible because of our Patreon and our patrons on that platform. Please do consider joining them and supporting our mission of providing independent political coverage. And as always, thank you for watching.
¿Son o no son trogloditas? Lo están ratificando aquí. Ellos mismos lo están ratificando. Y vamos a recuperar el Banco de Venezuela para ponerlo al servicio de los venezolanos. No está en venta, pero usted sabe que yo lo puedo expropiar perfectamente, ¿verdad? Lo puedo expropiar.